The alpha rejected his pregnant mate as worthless. Years later, son he never knew returned to claim throne. The scream tore through the great hall before anyone could stop it. Elena Hart stood frozen at the center of the room, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Every eye in the pack was on her, every whisper had already turned into a roar, and at the front of it all stood Damian Cross, the alpha of the Cross Pack, his jaw tight, and his eyes cold as frozen stone. "You are nothing to me," he said, his voice carrying through the silence like a blade cutting through fog. "You were never meant to be my mate. This bond means nothing." Elena's knees nearly buckled. She had felt the pull toward him the moment she walked into the hall that morning, the invisible thread that connected true mates, the kind of bond wolves waited a lifetime to find. She had felt it, and so had he. She had seen it in his eyes for one brief moment, before the coldness returned, before the pride and the fear of his counsel took over. "Damian," she whispered, stepping toward him, her hand trembling as she reached out. "Please, you felt it too. I know you did." He stepped back from her, as if her touch would burn him. Behind him, the pack elders exchanged glances, some smug, some uncomfortable, but none of them spoke up to defend her. She was nobody. A low-ranking wolf from a family with no name, no power, no wealth, and he was the alpha, the strongest wolf in the Northern Territories, expected to bond with someone of noble blood, someone who could strengthen alliances and secure the future of the pack. "There must be a mistake," Damian said, louder now, so the entire hall could hear him clearly. "The moon goddess does not choose weakness for an alpha. I refuse this bond. I reject you, Elena Hart, as my mate." The words hit her like physical blows. Every wolf in the room felt the shift in the air, the strange heaviness that came when a mate bond was broken by rejection. It was rare, it was cruel, and it was almost never survived without lasting pain. Elena's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall in front of these people. She would not give them the satisfaction of watching her break. She lifted her chin, even as her whole world crumbled beneath her feet, and she looked at Damian one last time. "You will regret this," she said quietly, her voice shaking, but steady enough for him to hear. "Not because of me, because of what you are throwing away." He said nothing. He simply turned and walked back to his seat at the head of the hall, where a beautiful, sharp-eyed she-wolf named Lydia Marsh was already waiting, a small, satisfied smile curling at the corner of her lips. Lydia was the daughter of a powerful allied pack leader, exactly the kind of match Damian's council had been pushing for since the day he became alpha. Elena had never stood a chance against that kind of pressure, that kind of politics. She had only ever had the bond, the invisible pull the moon goddess herself had placed between her and Damian. And apparently, that meant nothing here. Elena did not wait to be escorted out. She turned on her heel and walked out of the hall herself, her spine straight, her steps steady, even though inside she felt like she was being torn apart piece by piece. The pack members parted around her like she was something contagious, something to be avoided. A few of the kinder ones lowered their eyes in sympathy, but none dared to speak to her. No one crossed an alpha's decision, especially not one made in front of the entire pack. Outside, the cold night air hit her face, and for the first time since the humiliation began, she let herself breathe. She walked past the training grounds, past the guest quarters where she had been staying since arriving at the Cross territory just 3 days earlier, for what she thought would be the happiest meeting of her life. She had traveled for a week to get here, invited by pack messengers the moment their sensors detected the mate bond, forming between her and the alpha of one of the strongest packs in the region. She had been so hopeful, so foolish, she thought now. She reached the edge of the territory, where the tall iron gates marked the boundary between the cross-pack lands and the open forest beyond. The guards at the gate glanced at her, clearly having already heard what happened inside. One of them, an older wolf with kind eyes, stepped forward. "Miss Hart," he said gently, "do you need an escort? It's dangerous to travel alone at night, especially through unclaimed territory." "I'll be fine," Elena said, her voice flat. "I don't belong here anymore. I never did." The guard didn't argue. He simply opened the gate for her, and watched as she walked out into the darkness, alone, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back, and a heart that felt shattered beyond repair. She walked for hours that night, her wolf senses guiding her through the unfamiliar forest, putting as much distance between herself and the cross territory as her body would allow. She did not cry, not at first. The shock was too fresh, too raw. It was only when she finally stopped to rest near a small stream, her legs aching and her mind exhausted, that the tears finally came. She thought about everything she had believed just one day earlier. She had believed in true mates, in destiny, in the idea that the moon goddess did not make mistakes when she connected two souls. She had believed that whatever gap existed between her low status and his high one would not matter once they were together, because true mates were supposed to be equals in the eyes of fate, no matter what the world around them said. She had been wrong. Status mattered. Politics mattered, and apparently, so did pride, more than any bond the universe could create. As she sat by the stream, wiping her eyes, she noticed something strange, a faint warmth in her stomach that had nothing to do with the cold night air around her. She pressed a hand against her abdomen, confused by the sensation, but too exhausted and heartbroken to think much of it. She told herself it was just stress, just the shock of everything that happened, and she curled up beneath a large tree to rest until morning, unable to walk any farther. When she woke the next day, the sun was already high in the sky, filtering down through the leaves above her. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot what had happened. Then the memory came rushing back, and with it, a fresh wave of pain. But something else came with it too. A strange clarity, a resolve she hadn't expected to find so quickly. She would not go back to her old pack, the small, weak pack she had come from, where everyone would know exactly what happened, and would look at her with pity for the rest of her life. She would not stay anywhere near the cross territory, where she might run into Damien or his new mate, or where the humiliation of that night would follow her like a shadow. She would start over, somewhere far away, somewhere no one knew her name, or the name Cross, or anything about mate bonds and rejections and broken hearts. She stood up, brushed the dirt from her clothes, and began walking south, away from everything she had ever known, toward a future she could not yet see. It took her nearly 3 weeks of careful travel, moving through territories she had permission to cross, and skirting around ones she did not, before she reached a quiet, human-friendly town near the southern coast, far outside the reach of any wolf pack politics. It was the kind of place where wolves and humans lived side by side without much notice of one another, where she could disappear into a normal life if she wanted to. It was there, in a small rented room above a bakery, that she finally understood the strange warmth she had felt that first night by the stream. She had gone to a local human doctor, not entirely trusting her own instincts after everything that happened, and the doctor had confirmed what some deep part of her had already begun to suspect. She was pregnant. The news hit her with a mixture of terror and something else, something she hadn't expected to feel. A flicker of hope, a reason to keep moving forward, even when everything else in her life felt broken beyond repair. She sat on the edge of the small bed in her rented room that night, one hand resting on her still flat stomach, and she made a decision that would shape the rest of her life, and the life of the child growing inside her. She would never tell Damien Cross about this child. She would never let him or his pack anywhere near her son or daughter. Whoever this child grew up to be, they would grow up far from the cruelty she had experienced in that great hall, far from a father who had called their mother worthless in front of an entire pack. She would raise this child alone, in strength, in safety, and in love, and she would make sure that no matter what kind of wolf they became, no one would ever again make them feel like they didn't matter. Outside her window, the moon rose high and full over the quiet town, and for the first time since the rejection, Elena felt something other than grief settle into her chest. It was determination. It was the quiet, fierce strength of a mother already fighting for a child the world did not yet know existed. She did not know it then, but that decision, made alone in a rented room above a bakery, would one day change the fate of an entire pack, and bring a broken alpha face to face with the consequences of the night he threw away everything that mattered most. For now, though, she simply pressed her hand against her stomach, closed her eyes, and made a silent promise to the child she had not yet met. "I will protect you," she whispered into the darkness, "no matter what it costs me." And somewhere far to the north, in a great hall that still smelled faintly of the humiliation from that night, Damien Cross sat alone on his throne, staring at nothing, unaware that the woman he had rejected as worthless was carrying the one thing that could have secured his legacy forever. He told himself he had made the right choice, He told himself the ache in his chest was nothing more than pride settling after a difficult decision. He was wrong, and it would take him many years to understand just how wrong he truly was. The days that followed Elena's decision were quiet in a way she hadn't expected. She found work at the small bakery beneath her rented room, kneading dough in the early mornings before the sun rose, learning the rhythm of a life that had nothing to do with packs or alphas or ancient bonds written in the stars. The bakery owner, a warm, older woman named Margaret Doyle, never asked too many questions, simply grateful for the extra pair of hands and the quiet, hard-working nature of her new tenant. Elena told no one about her wolf nature, and no one seemed to suspect it. The town was used to a mixture of humans and shifters living together without much fuss, and as long as she kept her instincts in check and her moon nights private, she blended in easily enough. It was strange, she thought, how easily she could disappear from a world that had once made her feel so powerless. Here, she was no one's rejected mate. Here, she was simply Elena, the young woman who baked bread and kept to herself. But even as the outside world grew calm, her inner world was anything but quiet. Every night, she felt the presence of the child growing inside her, a small but undeniable proof that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. She spent her evenings sitting by the window of her small room, one hand resting on her stomach, wondering what kind of wolf this child would become. She thought about the strange, powerful pull she had felt from Damien the moment she first saw him, the kind of bond that only formed between true mates. If that bond was real, and she believed with everything in her heart that it was, then the child she carried would inherit more than just alpha blood. They would inherit Damien's strength, his presence, his natural ability to command a room without saying a word. The thought both comforted and terrified her. A child with that kind of power would need protection more than most, especially given the circumstances of their birth. She could already imagine the way certain packs might react if they discovered the truth, the way rivals of the cross pack might try to use her child as a weapon or a bargaining chip. She resolved, more firmly with each passing day, that no one could ever know who this child's father truly was. Weeks turned into months. Elena's stomach grew round, and with it, her fear and her determination both grew stronger. She read every book on shifter pregnancies she could find, tucked away quietly in the town's small library, teaching herself everything she would need to know to keep her child safe and healthy, without the support of a pack healer or an alpha's protection, the things most pregnant she-wolves relied on without a second thought. She learned to hunt small game in the surrounding woods when her body allowed it, strengthening herself the way her instincts demanded, preparing not just for the birth but for the years of solitary parenting that would follow. She had no pack to lean on, no family nearby, no mate to share the burden. She had only herself and the fierce, growing love she felt for the child she had not yet met. One evening, several months into her pregnancy, Elena felt a strange, powerful kick from deep inside her belly, stronger than anything she had felt before. She gasped, pressing both hands against her stomach, and for a moment, fear gripped her chest. But then she felt it again, steady and strong, and she realized it wasn't distress, it was strength. Even before birth, this child was showing signs of unusual power, the kind of raw wolf energy that marked dominant bloodlines. She smiled softly to herself, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, though these tears felt different from the ones she had cried the night of her rejection. These were tears of quiet pride. "You're going to be strong," she whispered to her unborn child. "Stronger than anyone who ever doubted you, stronger than the people who doubted me." As the months passed, Elena also began preparing practically for the life ahead. She saved every coin she earned from the bakery, setting aside a small fund for the baby's needs. She found a kind, discreet midwife in a neighboring town, a retired wolf healer named Nora Whitfield who had left pack life decades earlier, and now helped both human and shifter mothers in the region, without asking uncomfortable questions. Nora quickly became one of the only people Elena trusted with pieces of the truth. Not the full story, not the name of the father, but enough for Nora to understand that Elena was navigating this pregnancy without any support from a pack, and that she needed both medical help and quiet loyalty. "You're stronger than most she-wolves I've met," Nora told her one afternoon, checking on the baby's heartbeat with careful, practiced hands. "Most wouldn't survive what you've been through, and still come out standing tall like this." "I don't have a choice," Elena replied simply. "This baby needs me to be strong, so I will be." Nora studied her for a long moment before nodding, a look of quiet respect in her eyes. That's the kind of strength that raises great wolves, she said. Whoever this child becomes, they'll be lucky to have a mother like you. Elena held on to those words in the difficult weeks that followed, weeks filled with exhaustion, worry, and the constant underlying fear of being discovered by someone from the Crosspack, or worse, from a rival territory that might sense the unusual strength radiating from her unborn child even from a distance. She kept her senses sharp, always alert, always ready to move again if she needed to. But no one came. No wolves from the north ever found their way to the quiet coastal town, and as the final weeks of her pregnancy approached, Elena finally allowed herself to breathe a little easier. Perhaps, she thought, she really had escaped that world completely. Perhaps her child would grow up in peace after all. She was wrong about that too, though it would be many years before the truth caught up with her. On a cool autumn night, beneath a sky scattered with stars, Elena went into labor in the small room above the bakery. Nora arrived quickly, calm and steady despite the late hour, guiding Elena through hours of pain and effort, with the quiet confidence of someone who had done this many times before. When the baby finally arrived, just as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Elena felt a wave of emotion so powerful it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. She looked down at the small, healthy baby boy in her arms, his eyes already open and alert in a way that surprised even Nora, and she felt, for the first time in nearly a year, something close to complete peace. "He's strong," Nora said softly, watching the baby grip Elena's finger with a tight, powerful little hand. "Very strong. I've never seen a newborn with a grip like that." Elena smiled through exhausted tears, brushing a soft kiss against her son's forehead. "His name is Kane," she whispered. "Kane Hart." She had chosen the name months earlier, wanting something strong and simple, something that belonged entirely to the two of them, with no trace of the cross name attached to it. Kane would grow up as Kane Hart, son of Elena Hart, with no knowledge of the powerful alpha bloodline running through his veins. Not until Elena believed he was ready, not until she was certain he would be safe. As she held her newborn son in the quiet morning light, Elena made one final promise, the same promise she had whispered into the darkness months earlier, but now spoken with even greater conviction. "I will protect you," she said softly, watching Kane's tiny eyes drift closed in peaceful sleep. "No matter what it costs me, no matter who comes looking, you will never know the pain I felt that night. You will only know strength, and love, and the truth of who you are, when the time is right." Outside, the sun rose fully over the small coastal town, casting warm golden light across the rooftops, marking the beginning of a new life for both mother and son, far removed from the cold halls of the Crosspack, and the Alpha, who still had no idea what he had truly lost. Years would pass before that truth ever found its way back to him, and when it finally did, nothing in his world would ever be the same again. 5 years passed in the quiet coastal town, and in that time, Kane Hart grew from a strong, alert newborn into a remarkably capable young boy. Elena watched him with a mixture of pride and quiet concern, noticing early on that he was different from the other children in town, both human and shifter alike. By the time he was 3, Kane could run faster than boys twice his age. By the time he was 4, he had already shifted into his wolf form during a moment of frustration, something most young wolves didn't manage until closer to 6 or 7 years old. Elena had rushed to calm him that day, holding his small, trembling wolf body close, until he shifted back, whispering reassurances into his fur, even as her mind raced with worry. "You have to be careful," she told him gently that night, tucking him into bed in their small but comfortable rented house, the one she had managed to save enough to move into, after years of careful work at the bakery, which she now co-owned alongside Margaret. "Your strength is special, Kane. But special things need to stay hidden sometimes, until they're ready to be seen." Kane looked up at her with serious brown eyes, far too serious for a child his age. "Why do I have to hide, Mama?" Elena brushed a hand through his dark hair, choosing her words carefully. "Because the world isn't always kind to things it doesn't understand yet. But one day, when you're older and stronger, you won't have to hide anymore. I promise you that." Kane nodded slowly, trusting his mother completely, the way young children do. He didn't ask more questions that night. but Elena knew it wouldn't be long before he did. Children as sharp as Cain rarely stayed satisfied with simple answers for long. She began training him carefully after that, not in the aggressive, competitive way pack children were trained, but with patience and structure, teaching him control above all else. She taught him to run through the forest behind their house until his human legs grew as strong and fast as his wolf ones. She taught him to sit still and quiet for long stretches, building the kind of discipline that would help him control the powerful instincts she could already see stirring inside him. She taught him kindness, too, careful to balance his growing strength with an equally strong sense of compassion, determined that whatever power he inherited would never be used to hurt others, the way pride and power had once hurt her. Cain thrived under her guidance. He excelled at the local school, effortlessly outpacing his classmates in both physical activities and academic work. Teachers often remarked to Elena how unusually mature and capable her son was for his age, praising his quick mind and his surprising patience with younger children. Elena accepted the compliments graciously, though inside, she felt a familiar flicker of worry every time someone noticed just how remarkable Cain truly was. She knew, deep down, that a boy with this much natural strength and presence would not stay hidden from the wider wolf world forever. Sooner or later, someone would notice. Sooner or later, the truth about his heritage would need to come out, whether she was ready for that moment or not. For now, though, she focused on building a stable, happy childhood for him. She wanted Cain to have real memories of laughter and safety before the weight of his true identity ever settled onto his shoulders. She took him to the coast on weekends, watching him splash in the shallow waves with the same fierce joy any young boy might show. She read to him every night stories of brave heroes and clever animals, stories that had nothing to do with alphas or packs or ancient bonds. She wanted him to know, above everything else, that he was loved simply for being himself, not for the power he carried or the bloodline running through his veins. Margaret, the bakery owner who had become something like family over the years, adored Cain as if he were her own grandson. She often kept an eye on him during Elena's longer work shifts, teaching him how to bake simple pastries, filling their small home with the comforting smell of fresh bread whenever he visited her shop. Cain loved those afternoons, covered in flour, laughing, as Margaret told him stories from her younger years. "That boy has an old soul," Margaret told Elena one evening, watching Cain help stack fresh loaves onto the cooling racks, with careful, focused hands. "Wise beyond his years, you've done a wonderful job raising him alone, dear." Elena smiled, though the compliment stirred a familiar ache in her chest. She hadn't wanted to raise him alone. She had wanted a partner, a mate who cherished both her and their child. But she had learned to accept the life she built instead, and she found real happiness in it, even without the family she had once dreamed of having. Still, some nights, after Cain had fallen asleep, Elena would sit by her window and think about Damien Cross. She wondered if he ever thought about her, if he ever regretted the words he spoke that night in the Great Hall. She wondered if he had heard any rumors of a pregnant mate disappearing, or if he had simply moved on with his life entirely, marrying Lydia Marsh and building the future he believed he wanted. She never allowed herself to dwell on those thoughts for long. Whatever regrets Damien carried were his own burden now. She had built a good life for herself and her son, far away from that pain, and she intended to keep it that way for as long as possible. But keeping secrets, especially secrets as significant as Cain's true heritage, was never easy, no matter how carefully Elena planned. As Cain grew older, his questions grew sharper too. "Mama," he asked one evening when he was 6 years old, sitting across from her at their small kitchen table, "why don't I have a father? All the other kids at school have one." Elena set down her fork slowly, choosing her words with the same careful precision she always used for questions about his heritage. "Not everyone has the same kind of family, Cain. Some families are just you and me, and that's more than enough." "But where is he?" Cain pressed, his young face serious and thoughtful. "Did he not want us?" The question struck Elena harder than she expected, and for a moment, she struggled to find the right response. She had promised herself she would never speak badly of Damien in front of Cain, no matter how much pain he had caused her. She wanted Cain to form his own opinions when the time came, not opinions shaped entirely by his mother's heartbreak. "He didn't know about you," Elena said finally, choosing the most honest answer she could give, without revealing everything just yet. "And things happened between us that made it impossible for us to stay together. But none of that is your fault, Cain. None of it changes how much I love you, or how special you are. Cain considered her words carefully, nodding slowly the way he always did, when processing something important. Will I ever meet him? Maybe someday, Elena said softly. When you're older, and when it's safe. I promise, when the time is right, you'll know everything. Cain accepted her answer, as he always did, trusting his mother's judgment completely. But Elena could see, even at such a young age, a quiet determination forming behind his eyes, a sense that one day, he intended to seek out the truth for himself, whether she was ready to share it or not. That night, after Cain had gone to sleep, Elena sat alone in the small living room, staring out at the dark sky beyond her window, the same way she had on so many nights since Cain's birth. She thought about the years ahead, about the inevitable moment when she would need to tell him everything, about his father, about the crosspack, about the powerful bloodline running through his veins. She wasn't ready yet, but she knew that time was moving faster than she wanted it to, carrying her toward a reckoning she could delay, but never fully avoid. As Cain continued to grow over the following 2 years, his strength and presence became increasingly difficult to hide. By the time he turned 8, he had already begun outperforming shifter children, several years older than him. During occasional gatherings Elena allowed him to attend with other local wolf families. Other parents began to whisper, some in admiration, some in quiet unease, about the remarkable young boy, with no known father, and unusually powerful bloodline traits. Elena knew she couldn't keep him isolated forever, nor did she want to. Cain needed connection to other wolves, needed to understand his own nature within a broader community, even if she kept the deepest truths about his father carefully guarded. She allowed him to train occasionally with a small, informal group of local shifter children, always watching closely, always ready to intervene if anyone grew too curious about his background. It was during one of these training sessions that an older visiting wolf, a traveling trader passing through the coastal town, first noticed something unusual about Cain's scent and presence. That boy, the trader said quietly to Elena, after observing Cain easily outmatch children years older than him in a friendly sparring exercise. He carries a strong bloodline, very strong, almost regal, if I didn't know better. Elena's heart raced, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. He's just naturally athletic, she said smoothly. Nothing more than that. The trader studied her for a long moment, clearly unconvinced, but he said nothing further, simply nodding politely before continuing on his journey. Elena watched him leave with a tight knot of anxiety, settling in her chest. It was a small moment, easily dismissed by most, but it served as a clear warning that Cain's true nature would not stay hidden forever, no matter how carefully she tried to shield him. That night, she made a quiet decision to begin preparing Cain more seriously, not just physically, but mentally, for the day the full truth would need to come out. She began teaching him more advanced control techniques, more disciplined training routines, subtly strengthening both his body and his character in preparation for a future she knew was approaching faster than she had ever wanted. Cain, sensing his mother's quiet shift in focus, grew more curious and more determined with each passing year. He didn't fully understand why his training had intensified, or why his mother sometimes looked at him with a strange mixture of pride and worry in her eyes. But he trusted her completely, working hard without complaint, driven by an instinct deep inside him that told him, even without words, that he was destined for something greater than the quiet coastal life he currently knew. Neither of them could have predicted just how soon that destiny would come calling. While Elena built a quiet life for herself and Cain far to the south, the crosspack in the north had fallen into a slow, painful decline, one that had begun the very night Damien rejected his true mate in front of the entire hall. At first, the changes were small, almost unnoticeable. A slight tension in pack meetings that hadn't existed before. A subtle drop in morale among the warriors, who had once respected their alpha without question, but now found themselves quietly doubting his judgment. Damien himself felt it too, though he refused to acknowledge the true source of his growing unease. He told himself, again and again, that he had made the right decision, that rejecting Elena had been necessary for the future stability of the pack. But deep in his chest, in the place where the mate bond had once pulsed with warmth and possibility, there was only a hollow, aching emptiness that never seemed to fade. His marriage to Lydia Marsh, finalized just months after Elena's departure, brought none of the strength or stability the council had promised. Lydia was beautiful and sharp-witted, the daughter of a powerful allied pack leader, and on the surface, their union appeared to strengthen the cross-pack's political standing considerably. But beneath that polished surface, cracks began to form almost immediately. Lydia had never felt a true mate bond with Damien, and she made no secret of her ambition to secure power and influence within the pack, regardless of whether real affection existed between them. She was clever, calculating, and patient, slowly working her way into positions of influence, replacing loyal pack advisors with her own allies, subtly shifting resources and favors toward her family's allied territory. Damien, distracted by the persistent ache of his broken bond and the growing pressures of leadership, failed to notice the extent of Lydia's maneuvering until significant damage had already been done. By the time Cain turned 5 years old, though Damien had no knowledge of his son's existence, the Crosspack's once thriving alliances had begun to fracture under the weight of Lydia's quiet manipulations. Trusted warriors who had served the pack faithfully for decades found themselves pushed aside in favor of Lydia's chosen replacements, wolves more loyal to her family's interests than to the Crosspack itself. Trade agreements that had once benefited the entire territory shifted to favor Lydia's home pack disproportionately, draining resources that should have strengthened the Crosslands. Damien, though he sensed something was wrong, struggled to pinpoint the source of the growing instability, his judgment clouded by years of suppressed guilt and unresolved grief he refused to fully confront. The pack elders, particularly an aging but sharp-minded advisor named Edwin Blake, grew increasingly concerned watching their once strong alpha slowly lose his grip on the territory he had inherited. Edwin had served the Crosspack since Damien's father led the territory, and he remembered clearly the night Damien rejected Elena, remembered the strange, heavy silence that had settled over the hall afterward, a silence that Edwin, in his decades of experience, recognized as deeply significant. "You made a mistake that night," Edwin told Damien bluntly, during a private meeting nearly 6 years after Elena's departure, when the pack's decline had become impossible to ignore, even to those determined not to see it. "The bond you broke wasn't just any bond, Damien. You felt it. Everyone in that hall felt it. True mate bonds don't form without reason, and breaking one carries consequences far beyond wounded pride." Damien's jaw tightened, old defensiveness rising quickly to the surface. The pack needed strength through alliance, Edwin. Elena had nothing to offer politically. "And what has Lydia offered exactly?" Edwin asked pointedly, watching as Damien's expression faltered slightly. "Because from where I stand, our alliances are weaker than they've been in decades. Our resources are being drained toward another pack's benefit, and our alpha looks more hollow with each passing year. I've watched this pack rise and fall under 3 different alphas, Damien, and I've never seen an alpha carry the kind of quiet grief you carry, no matter how hard you try to hide it." Damien said nothing for a long moment, staring out the window of his study toward the training grounds below, where young pack warriors sparred beneath the afternoon sun. He thought, as he often did in quiet moments, of the strange warmth he had felt the instant Elena walked into the hall all those years ago, a warmth he had spent years trying to forget, trying to convince himself had meant nothing. "It's done," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. "There's no changing what happened." "No," Edwin agreed, his expression softening slightly with something that looked almost like pity. "But there is still time to strengthen what remains, if you're willing to open your eyes to what's truly happening within your own walls." Damien didn't respond to that, and Edwin eventually left the study without pressing further, though the conversation lingered heavily in Damien's mind for weeks afterward. He began, slowly and reluctantly, to pay closer attention to the shifting dynamics within his pack, uncovering pieces of Lydia's influence he had previously overlooked or dismissed. What he found troubled him deeply, though pride and stubbornness kept him from acting decisively for several more years. Meanwhile, Lydia herself grew increasingly frustrated by the lack of an heir. Despite years of marriage, no pregnancy had ever occurred between her and Damien, a fact that quietly troubled pack elders and fueled growing uncertainty about the territory's future leadership. Lydia, unwilling to accept responsibility for this failure, quietly began spreading rumors suggesting the fault lay with Damien himself, subtly undermining his authority, even further, among certain pack members who valued strong, fertile leadership above all else. Damien, for his part, never openly questioned why no children had come from his union with Lydia, though privately, doubts occasionally crept into his mind, doubts he refused to examine too closely, fearing what those thoughts might reveal about the true nature of his forced, loveless bond. He did not know, and could not have known, that many hundreds of miles to the south, his true mate had already given him a son growing stronger and sharper with each passing year, a son who would one day return to claim everything Damien had spent years slowly losing. As the years continued to pass, the tension within the Crosspack grew increasingly difficult to ignore. Whispers spread among the younger warriors, questioning whether their alpha still possessed the strength and clarity needed to lead effectively. Rival packs, sensing the growing instability, began testing the borders of Cross territory more frequently, probing for weaknesses they could exploit. Damien, though still physically powerful and undeniably skilled in combat, found himself increasingly worn down by the constant political maneuvering required to hold his fracturing alliances together. He spent long nights alone in his study, staring at old pack records, old maps, old memories of a simpler time before his forced marriage, before the hollow ache that had settled permanently into his chest. Sometimes, in his quietest, most vulnerable moments, he allowed himself to wonder what had become of Elena Hart. He wondered if she had found happiness elsewhere, if she had ever forgiven him, if the strange, powerful bond he had so callously dismissed had ever truly faded from her heart, the way it stubbornly refused to fade from his own. He never spoke these thoughts aloud, not even to Edwin, the one advisor he trusted enough to confide in occasionally. Some wounds, he had learned, were better left unexamined, buried deep beneath years of duty and responsibility. But wounds left unexamined rarely healed properly, and as the Crosspack continued its slow decline, driven by Lydia's quiet manipulations and Damien's own unresolved guilt, the stage was being set, piece by piece, for a reckoning neither of them could yet foresee. Far to the south, a young boy trained under his mother's careful guidance, growing stronger, sharper, and more capable with each passing season, entirely unaware of the powerful legacy waiting for him, or the fractured, struggling pack that would one day desperately need the strength only he could provide. Edwin Blake, meanwhile, continued his own quiet investigation into the pack's growing troubles, driven by decades of loyalty to the Cross bloodline and a deep, instinctive sense that something significant had been lost the night Damien rejected his true mate. He began discreetly reaching out to old contacts throughout the Wolf territories, searching for any information about Elena Hart's whereabouts, driven by a growing suspicion that her disappearance held answers crucial to understanding the pack's current struggles. His search yielded little for years, Elena having covered her tracks carefully during her initial departure from Cross territory. But Edwin was a patient wolf, experienced in the slow, careful work of gathering information across scattered territories, and he refused to abandon his search entirely, sensing instinctively that the truth, whenever it finally surfaced, would prove far more significant than anyone currently realized. He kept his investigations private, unwilling to raise false hopes or unnecessary alarm within the already struggling pack, quietly continuing his search year after year, patiently waiting for the moment when the pieces would finally begin falling into place. That moment, though none of them yet realized it, was drawing steadily closer with each passing season, carried forward by the quiet, determined growth of a young boy training diligently under his mother's watchful guidance, entirely unaware of the powerful destiny already unfolding around him. By the time Cain turned 12, he had grown into a lean, quick, remarkably strong young boy, taller than most of his classmates, and noticeably more disciplined in both his studies and his physical training. Elena watched him grow with a quiet pride that never fully erased the underlying worry she carried, worry about the day the full truth of his heritage would finally need to be revealed. That day arrived sooner than she expected, brought on not by her own careful planning, but by an unexpected encounter that neither of them could have predicted. It happened on a quiet afternoon in early spring, while Cain was walking home from school along the edge of the forest bordering their small coastal town. He had taken this path countless times before, familiar with every twist and turn, every rustle of leaves and distant bird call. But on this particular afternoon, he noticed something different, a subtle shift in the air, an unfamiliar scent carried faintly on the breeze, He paused, his senses sharpening instinctively, years of careful training kicking in, without conscious thought. He scanned the tree line carefully, and after a moment, he spotted a figure watching him from a short distance away, a tall, weathered man, with graying hair and sharp, assessing eyes. "You have strong instincts," the stranger said calmly, stepping forward slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. "Sharper than most boys your age." Kane straightened, wary but curious, his mother's countless lessons about caution echoing clearly in his mind. "Who are you?" "My name is Edwin Blake," the man said, his gaze studying Kane's face with an intensity that made the boy distinctly uncomfortable. "I've been searching for someone for a very long time. I believe I may have finally found her son." Kane's heart raced, though he kept his expression carefully neutral, another skill his mother had drilled into him over the years. "I don't know what you're talking about." Edwin smiled faintly, though there was nothing threatening in his expression, only a kind of weary relief. "You have her eyes," he said softly, "but everything else about you, boy, comes from somewhere else entirely." Before Kane could respond, a sharp, familiar voice called out from further down the path. Elena, having sensed something was wrong through the subtle, instinctive connection she still maintained with her son even from a distance, came rushing toward them, her expression shifting rapidly from concern to something far more complicated the moment she recognized the older wolf standing before her son. "Edwin," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled tension. "Stay away from him." Edwin turned to face her fully, his expression softening with genuine relief. "Elena, after all these years, I finally found you." "You shouldn't have come here," Elena said firmly, positioning herself protectively between Edwin and Kane. "This isn't your business, Edwin. It never was." "He's the Alpha's son," Edwin said quietly, his gaze flickering briefly toward Kane, who stood frozen, absorbing this stunning revelation with wide, disbelieving eyes. "I've suspected it for years, ever since I began searching for you, but seeing him now, there's no doubt left in my mind. He carries Damien's presence unmistakably." "He carries nothing that concerns the Crosspack," Elena said sharply, though her voice trembled slightly, betraying the depth of her fear. "Kane has built a life here, far from that world, and I intend to keep it that way." Edwin studied her carefully for a long moment, before speaking again, his tone gentler now. "The pack is struggling, Elena. Badly. Lydia's influence has drained our alliances, weakened our defenses, and Damien himself has grown increasingly hollow over the years. I'm not here to force anything upon you or your son. But I believe, eventually, the pack will need him, and I believe, deep down, he deserves to know the truth of who he is." Elena's expression hardened, old pain resurfacing sharply at the mention of the pack's struggles she felt no sympathy toward given the pain that Pack had caused her. "That's not your decision to make, Edwin. It's mine, and Kane's, when he's ready." Kane, who had remained silent throughout this tense exchange, finally found his voice, stepping forward slightly despite his mother's protective stance. "Wait," he said firmly, looking directly at Edwin. "Is this true? Am I really the son of an Alpha?" Edwin nodded slowly, respecting the directness of the question. "Yes. Damien Cross, Alpha of the Cross Pack in the Northern Territories, is your father, though he has no knowledge of your existence." Kane absorbed this information with a mixture of shock, confusion, and something else, a quiet, curious determination that Elena recognized instantly, having seen glimpses of that same expression countless times throughout his childhood, whenever he encountered a challenge he intended to fully understand. "Kane," Elena said softly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder, "we can talk about this at home, privately. You don't owe this man any answers right now." Kane nodded slowly, though his eyes remained fixed thoughtfully on Edwin for a long moment, before he finally turned back toward his mother. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's go home." Edwin didn't attempt to stop them, watching quietly as Elena guided Kane away from the forest path, though before they disappeared from view entirely, he called out one final message. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Elena," he said sincerely. "I only wanted to know the truth, for the sake of the pack, and for the sake of the boy. Whatever you decide moving forward, that choice remains entirely yours." Elena didn't respond, guiding Kane firmly homeward, her mind racing with the sudden, unexpected collision of her carefully guarded past with the peaceful present she had worked so hard to build. That evening, after a tense, largely silent dinner, Elena finally sat Kane down in their small living room, recognizing that the time for careful, gradual revelations had abruptly ended. Kane deserved, and needed, the full truth now, delivered clearly and honestly, regardless of how difficult that conversation might prove to be. She told him everything. She told him about the mate bond she had shared with his father, about the humiliating rejection in front of the entire pack, about her decision to disappear and raise him quietly, protecting him from a world that had once caused her tremendous pain. She told him about Damien's forced marriage to Lydia, about the political pressures that had driven his father's cruel decision, though she was careful not to portray Damien as purely villainous, wanting Kane to eventually form his own judgments, rather than inheriting her pain entirely as his own. Kane listened silently throughout her explanation, his expression shifting through waves of shock, confusion, quiet anger, and finally, a thoughtful, determined resolve that reminded Elena strongly of the strength she had always sensed simmering beneath his calm exterior. "He rejected you," Kane said finally, his voice tight with barely restrained emotion. "In front of everyone, because you weren't powerful enough for him." "Yes," Elena confirmed softly, watching her son carefully. "But Kane, listen to me. Whatever anger you feel right now, I need you to understand something important. That pain belongs to me, not to you. You don't have to carry it as your own." "But it does concern me," Kane argued, his young voice steady, despite the emotion clearly simmering beneath the surface. "He's my father. Whether I ever meet him or not, what he did affects who I am, where I came from." Elena sighed softly, recognizing the truth in her son's words even as it stirred fresh anxiety within her. "What do you want to do, Kane? Do you want to seek him out? Do you want to learn more about the pack, about that world?" Kane considered the question carefully, for several long moments before answering. "I don't know yet," he admitted honestly, "but I don't want to hide from it anymore, Mama. I want to understand where I come from, even if I decide never to be part of that world." Elena nodded slowly, respecting her son's honesty, even as fear tightened around her heart. "Then we'll figure this out together," she said firmly. "Whatever you decide, Kane, I'll support you. But promise me you'll be careful. That world can be far more dangerous than you realize." Kane nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of his mother's warning. "I promise." Neither of them could have predicted, in that quiet, emotional conversation, just how significant Kane's eventual journey into that dangerous world would ultimately become, not just for himself, but for the future of an entire struggling pack, desperately awaiting the return of the heir they never knew existed. 6 more years passed, following that pivotal conversation, years during which Kane grew from a curious, determined boy into a formidable young man, standing well over 6 feet tall by his 18th birthday, his body honed through years of increasingly intense training. His mind sharpened by both formal education and the countless hours he spent studying everything he could find about pack politics, wolf hierarchies, and the northern territories he had never visited, but felt an increasingly powerful pull toward understanding. Elena had kept her promise, supporting Kane's growing determination to understand his heritage, while insisting on careful, methodical preparation before any potential confrontation with his birth pack. She arranged for Edwin, who had continued visiting periodically over the years, earning gradual trust from both mother and son, to share detailed knowledge of pack customs, combat techniques specific to alpha bloodlines, and the complex political dynamics currently straining the cross-territory. Edwin proved an invaluable teacher, his decades of experience within the pack providing Kane with insights no amount of independent study could have offered. Under his careful guidance, combined with Elena's own rigorous training methods, Kane developed into an exceptionally skilled young wolf, his natural alpha bloodline strength enhanced further by years of disciplined preparation. "You're ready," Edwin told him during one of their final training sessions, watching Kane execute a complex combat sequence with fluid, powerful precision. "More ready than most alphas twice your age. Your instincts are exceptional, Kane. Whatever path you choose moving forward, you possess the strength to walk it successfully." Kane nodded, wiping sweat from his brow as he caught his breath, considering Edwin's words carefully. "I'm still not certain what path that should be," he admitted honestly. "Part of me wants nothing to do with that pack, considering everything they put my mother through, but another part of me feels a strange, undeniable pull toward understanding it fully, toward seeing that world with my own eyes. That pull is natural, Edwin said gently. You carry powerful bloodline instincts, Kane, deeply connected to leadership and territory. It's not weakness to feel that connection, even toward a pack that caused your mother pain. Kane considered this for a long moment before nodding slowly. I think it's time, he said finally, his voice steady with quiet determination. I need to see it myself, not to claim anything, not yet, just to understand. Elena, who had been quietly listening from the doorway during this exchange, felt her heart tighten with a complicated mixture of pride and fear. She had known this moment was approaching for years, had prepared herself as thoroughly as possible, but nothing could fully erase the anxiety of watching her son prepare to step into the world that had once caused her so much pain. If you're certain, she said softly, stepping into the room, then I won't stand in your way, Kane. But please, be careful. That world is far more complicated and dangerous than the version you've studied from a distance. I understand, Mama, Kane said, crossing the room to embrace her warmly. I promise I'll be careful, and I promise, no matter what I discover there, I'll always come back to you. Elena held onto him tightly for a long moment, memorizing the strength and warmth of her son's embrace before finally releasing him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I know you will, she said softly. You've grown into an extraordinary young man, Kane. Whatever happens next, I'm proud of who you've become. In the weeks that followed, Kane prepared meticulously for his journey north, studying maps of the Cross territory that Edwin had carefully provided, memorizing key landmarks, pack customs, and potential dangers he might encounter along the way. He decided, after careful consideration, that he would travel under an assumed identity initially, unwilling to reveal his true heritage until he fully understood the political landscape he would be entering. Edwin agreed this was a wise precaution, given the instability currently plaguing the pack under Lydia's continued manipulations. Lydia has grown increasingly desperate over the years, Edwin explained during one of their final planning sessions. She's failed to produce an heir, and rumors have begun circulating, questioning her position within the pack. If she discovers your true identity too soon, before you've established your own strength and allies within the territory, she may see you as a significant threat, worth eliminating, before you can claim any legitimate standing. Kane absorbed this warning seriously, understanding the genuine danger involved in his planned journey. I'll be careful, he assured Edwin. I'll observe first, understand the political dynamics fully, before revealing anything about my true identity. A wise approach, Edwin agreed, nodding approvingly. I'll do what I can from within the pack to help ease your path once you arrive, though I'll need to remain cautious myself, given how closely Lydia monitors any potential threats to her position. With his preparations finally complete, Kane said his final goodbyes to his mother and to Margaret, who had become like family over the years, both women watching with a complicated mixture of pride and worry as he set off on the long journey north, toward the territory that held both his birthright and the painful history of his mother's rejection. The journey itself took nearly 2 weeks, Kane traveling carefully through various territories, relying on the extensive knowledge Edwin had provided to navigate safely around potential dangers. He observed the wolf world with fresh, curious eyes throughout his travels, comparing what he witnessed against everything he had studied and learned over the years, gradually developing a more nuanced, complex understanding of pack politics beyond the simplified explanations available in his earlier studies. As he finally approached the borders of Cross territory, Kane felt a strange, powerful sensation building steadily within his chest, an unmistakable pull toward the land itself, as though some deep, instinctive part of him recognized this territory as belonging to him, despite having never set foot here before. He paused at the edge of the border, taking a long moment to steady himself before finally crossing into the land that held his true heritage. The Cross territory proved larger and more impressive than Kane had anticipated, sprawling forests giving way to organized training grounds, sturdy stone structures, and a bustling central village clearly designed to support a large, thriving pack community. Yet even as he observed the impressive physical infrastructure, Kane quickly noticed subtle signs of the instability Edwin had described. Tension visible in the postures of passing pack members, a certain wariness, in the eyes of warriors patrolling the borders, a palpable undercurrent of uncertainty running beneath the surface of daily pack life. Cain made his way carefully into the central village under his assumed identity, presenting himself as a traveling wolf seeking temporary work and lodging, a common enough occurrence that raised no particular suspicion among the pack members he encountered. He secured a small room above a local tavern, using the cover story Edwin had helped him construct, and began quietly observing pack dynamics over the following days, careful never to draw undue attention to himself despite his natural, commanding presence. It didn't take long for Cain to notice the significant tension surrounding the pack's current leadership. Whispered conversations in the tavern revealed growing dissatisfaction among various pack members regarding both Damien's increasingly withdrawn leadership style and Lydia's controversial political maneuvering. Cain listened carefully to these conversations, piecing together a clearer picture of the pack's current struggles, his analytical mind quickly identifying patterns and connections that confirmed much of what Edwin had described during his training. On his third day within the territory, Cain finally caught his first glimpse of Damien Cross himself, observing from a careful distance as the Alpha moved through the village, addressing minor pack concerns with a kind of weary, mechanical efficiency that lacked the commanding presence Cain had expected from an Alpha of his reputation. Cain studied his father carefully, absorbing every detail, from his tall, powerfully built frame to the subtle exhaustion visible in his expression, the way his eyes seemed to carry a heavy, unspoken burden despite his continued efforts to maintain an authoritative demeanor before his pack. Cain felt a complex swirl of emotions rising within him as he observed this man: anger at the pain he had caused Elena, curiosity about the powerful bloodline connecting them, and an unexpected flicker of something that almost resembled sympathy, watching a once strong leader, clearly struggling beneath the weight of years of poor decisions and mounting political pressure. He didn't approach Damien that day, choosing instead to continue his careful observation from a distance, gathering as much information as possible before deciding how, or if, he intended to reveal his true identity. He spent the following days similarly, observing pack training sessions, noting the skill level of various warriors, identifying key figures within the pack's power structure, including several wolves, clearly aligned with Lydia's growing influence. During one such observation session at the pack's central training grounds, Cain found himself unexpectedly drawn into a sparring demonstration when a visiting warrior, testing the skills of newcomers within the territory, challenged him directly in front of a gathering crowd of pack members. Cain hesitated only briefly before accepting the challenge, recognizing that refusing might draw more unwanted attention than participating carefully would. He entered the sparring circle with practiced calm, quickly assessing his opponent's strengths and weaknesses as the match began. The fight, though brief, proved immediately impressive to the gathered crowd. Cain's movements were precise, powerful, and remarkably controlled, quickly overwhelming his opponent through a combination of natural strength and years of disciplined training. Within moments, he had decisively won the match, earning surprised murmurs and appreciative nods from the pack members watching nearby. Among those watching, unbeknownst to Cain at the time, stood Damien himself, who had paused during his rounds through the village to observe the unexpected demonstration of skill from the unfamiliar young traveler. Something about the young man's fighting style, his commanding presence despite his apparent youth, stirred an unfamiliar, inexplicable sense of recognition within Damien, though he couldn't immediately place the source of that strange, powerful feeling. He watched Cain carefully as the young man accepted quiet congratulations from nearby pack members before slipping away from the crowd, moving with the same controlled, purposeful efficiency he had displayed throughout the brief sparring match. Damien found himself unable to shake the strange, persistent pull he felt toward this unfamiliar traveler, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years, not since the night he had felt an undeniable, powerful bond form the moment Elena Hart walked into his hall so many years earlier. He told himself it was simply admiration for impressive combat skill, nothing more. But deep down, in a place he rarely allowed himself to examine too closely, Damien felt an unsettling certainty that something significant, something he couldn't yet fully understand, had just entered his territory, carrying implications that would soon prove impossible to ignore. Cain, meanwhile, retreated to his rented room above the tavern, his mind racing with the events of the day. He hadn't intended to draw such public attention so early in his observation period, and he knew he would need to proceed even more carefully moving forward, particularly given the way he had noticed Damien watching him during the final moments of his sparring match. He sat by the small window of his room that evening, staring out at the darkening sky above the Cross territory, feeling the weight of his complicated heritage pressing more heavily upon him with each passing day. He thought of his mother, of the promise he had made to remain careful, and he resolved to slow his approach considerably moving forward, taking additional time to fully understand the political landscape before risking any further public displays of his natural strength and skill. He couldn't have known, as he settled in for an uneasy night's sleep, that his father had already begun quietly investigating the identity of the impressive young traveler who had so unexpectedly stirred long-buried, powerful instincts within him, setting in motion a chain of events that would soon bring father and son face to face in ways neither of them could yet anticipate. News of the unfamiliar young traveler's impressive victory at the training ground spread quickly through the Cross territory over the following days, carried through the usual channels of pack gossip and casual conversation. Kane, despite his best efforts to remain inconspicuous, found himself increasingly recognized around the village, warriors nodding respectfully as he passed, several younger pack members even approaching him with genuine curiosity about his combat training and background. He handled these interactions carefully, offering vague, believable answers about his travels and training, without revealing any details that might connect him to his true heritage. Still, he couldn't shake the growing awareness that his presence within the territory had become considerably more noticeable than he had originally intended, a development that filled him with cautious unease, given everything Edwin had warned him about regarding Lydia's watchful, suspicious nature. That unease proved justified sooner than Kane expected. On the 5th day following his sparring match, as he made his way through the central village toward his rented room, he found his path deliberately blocked by 2 pack warriors, their expressions carefully neutral but their stance unmistakably purposeful. "The Alpha requests your presence," one of the warriors said, his tone leaving little room for polite refusal. "He's interested in speaking with the traveler, who defeated one of our most skilled warriors so easily." Kane felt his pulse quicken, though he maintained careful composure, recognizing that outright refusal would likely raise more suspicion than compliance. "Of course," he said calmly, following the warriors through the village toward the large central hall that served as the seat of the Crosspack's leadership, the same hall, though Kane didn't yet know it, where his mother had once been so publicly and cruelly rejected. As he entered the impressive stone structure, Kane felt an unmistakable, powerful shift in the atmosphere, a heaviness in the air that seemed to carry echoes of significant events long past. He pushed the sensation aside, focusing instead on maintaining careful composure as he was led toward the main chamber, where Damien Cross sat waiting, his expression carefully assessing as Kane entered the room. For a long moment, father and son studied each other in silence, neither yet aware of the significance of the connection unfolding between them. Damien felt the same strange, powerful pull he had experienced during Kane's sparring match, intensified now by their closer proximity, though he still couldn't quite identify the source of this inexplicable sensation. "I hear you're quite skilled in combat," Damien said finally, breaking the tense silence, his voice carrying the practiced authority of an experienced alpha, despite the underlying weariness Kane had noticed during his earlier observations. "I've trained extensively," Kane replied carefully, keeping his tone respectful but appropriately guarded. "My mother believed strongly in discipline and preparation." Something flickered briefly across Damien's expression at the mention of a mother, though Kane couldn't quite identify what emotion had caused that subtle reaction. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Damien said after a brief pause. "What brings you to Cross territory, traveler? You're clearly skilled enough to find opportunities in many packs across these lands." Kane considered his response carefully, drawing on the cover story he and Edwin had developed. "I've heard stories about this territory," he said smoothly. "Its history, its strength. I wanted to see it for myself, perhaps find opportunities to prove my own worth here." Damien studied him carefully for a long moment, something in his gaze suggesting he sensed there was more to this traveler's story than he was currently revealing, though he couldn't quite articulate what specifically raised his suspicion. "You carry yourself with unusual confidence for someone without an established pack," he observed. "Where exactly did you train? Your technique reminds me of styles favored by more prominent bloodlines." Kane felt a brief flicker of alarm at this observation, recognizing that his father's instincts, though dulled by years of political struggle, remained sharp enough to notice significant details. "I was fortunate to train under an experienced mentor," he said carefully, deliberately vague. "Someone with considerable knowledge of advanced combat techniques." Damien nodded slowly, clearly not entirely satisfied with this answer, but choosing not to press further in this particular moment. "Well," he said finally, "Cross Territory could benefit from additional skilled warriors, particularly given certain challenges we've faced recently. You're welcome to remain here, train with our warriors, prove your capabilities further, if that interests you." Kane recognized this as an unexpected but potentially valuable opportunity, allowing him continued, legitimate access to observe pack dynamics more closely while gathering additional information before deciding how to proceed regarding his true identity. "I would be honored," he said, offering a respectful nod. "Good," Damien said, though something in his expression suggested lingering unresolved curiosity about this mysterious young traveler. "Report to the training grounds tomorrow morning. Our head warrior will assess your skills further and integrate you into our regular training schedule." Kane nodded again, offering appropriate thanks before being escorted from the chamber, his mind racing with the implications of this unexpected development. He had now secured legitimate access within the pack structure, but he had also drawn considerably more direct attention from his father than he had originally intended, a development that carried both opportunities and risks he would need to navigate extremely carefully moving forward. As Kane left the hall, Damien remained seated for a long while afterward, staring thoughtfully at the space where the young traveler had stood, an unsettling, persistent sense of familiarity nagging at the edges of his consciousness. He found himself unable to identify the source of this strange sensation, though something deep within him insisted it carried significant importance he couldn't yet fully grasp. Unbeknownst to either father or son, Edwin Blake had witnessed portions of this meeting from a discreet distance, having grown increasingly concerned about Kane's more direct exposure to Damien's attention. He found Kane later that evening, pulling him aside for an urgent, private conversation. "You need to be more careful," Edwin warned, his expression tense with genuine concern. "Damien's instincts, though weakened by years of struggle, remain sharper than you might expect. The longer you remain here, actively engaging with him directly, the greater the risk of your true identity being discovered before you're fully prepared for that revelation." "I understand the risk," Kane acknowledged, "but this also provides valuable opportunity, Edwin. Training directly within the pack, observing dynamics from within, rather than merely from a distance. I believe the benefits currently outweigh the risks, provided I remain appropriately cautious moving forward." Edwin considered this for a long moment, before reluctantly nodding. "Very well. But please, Kane, exercise extreme caution, particularly regarding Lydia. She's grown increasingly desperate and paranoid over recent years, and if she suspects even briefly that you might pose a threat to her position, she won't hesitate to act against you, regardless of whether her suspicions prove accurate." Kane absorbed this warning seriously, understanding fully the genuine dangers involved in his continued presence within the territory. "I'll be careful," he promised, "but I've come too far now to turn back without fully understanding this world, Edwin. I need to see this through." Edwin studied him for a long moment, recognizing the same fierce determination he had first noticed years earlier during their initial training sessions together. "Then I'll continue supporting you as best I can," he said finally, "but please, remain vigilant. The coming weeks will likely prove far more dangerous than anything you've encountered so far." As Kane settled in for another uneasy night's sleep, preparing himself mentally for his first official day of training within his father's pack the following morning, he couldn't help but reflect on the strange, complicated emotions stirring within him. He had come to this territory seeking understanding, seeking answers about his heritage, and the painful history connecting his mother to this powerful, struggling pack. He hadn't expected to feel such a complex mixture of curiosity, wariness, and unexpected connection toward the very father who had once so cruelly rejected the woman who raised him. Yet here he was, drawn deeper into this world, with each passing day, uncertain exactly where this dangerous, unpredictable path would ultimately lead him. Whatever happened next, Kane understood clearly that there was no turning back now. He had crossed too deeply into this world to retreat without seeing his journey through to its inevitable, significant conclusion. The following morning, Kane arrived at the training grounds precisely as instructed, finding a group of pack warriors already assembled under the watchful eye of a broad-shouldered, battle-scarred wolf named Gareth Holt, the pack's head warrior and training master. Gareth studied Kane with obvious skepticism as he approached, clearly having heard about the newcomer's impressive sparring victory, but unwilling to grant automatic respect without personal verification. "So you're the one who beat Corin," Gareth said gruffly, referring to the warrior Kane had defeated during his earlier demonstration. "Let's see if that was skill or luck." Over the following hours, Gareth put Kane through an increasingly demanding series of combat exercises, testing his strength, speed, technique, and endurance against multiple opponents simultaneously. Kane approached each challenge with careful, controlled focus, drawing on years of disciplined training under both his mother's guidance and Edwin's specialized instruction, gradually earning grudging respect from Gareth and the surrounding warriors as he consistently outperformed expectations. By the session's conclusion, Gareth's skepticism had transformed into genuine, if reluctant, admiration. "You've got real skill, traveler," he acknowledged, wiping sweat from his brow as the training session finally wound down. "Where exactly did you say you trained again?" "I didn't say," Kane replied with a slight, careful smile, deflecting the question smoothly, without appearing evasive. Gareth chuckled, apparently satisfied with this response given the tendency of skilled travelers to guard the secrets of their training. "Fair enough. Well, you've earned a place among our regular warriors, at least provisionally. Keep training like this, and you might just earn a permanent position within the pack." Kane nodded his thanks, genuinely pleased by this development, despite the underlying complexity of his true motivations for being there. Over the following days, he settled into a regular training routine, gradually building relationships with several of the pack's younger warriors, careful always to maintain appropriate boundaries, while gathering additional insights into the pack's internal dynamics and ongoing political struggles. He learned, through careful observation and occasional conversation, increasingly detailed information about Lydia's growing influence, about specific pack resources being redirected toward her family's allied territory, about the mounting frustration among loyal warriors who felt increasingly sidelined in favor of Lydia's chosen allies. He also learned more about his father directly, observing Damien's leadership style during pack meetings and public gatherings, noting the way genuine authority occasionally flickered through the alpha's otherwise weary, guarded demeanor. Despite himself, Kane found his initial anger toward his father gradually complicating into something more nuanced. He still felt genuine resentment regarding the pain Damien had caused his mother, a pain he had witnessed indirectly throughout his childhood, despite Elena's careful efforts to shield him from the full weight of her grief. But he also began recognizing signs of a once strong leader, now trapped within a difficult, politically complicated situation, largely of his own making, struggling visibly beneath burdens he seemed unable to fully articulate or resolve. This complexity intensified further during an unexpected encounter, roughly 2 weeks into Kane's residence within the pack. Late one evening, following an unusually demanding training session, Kane found himself walking alone through a quiet section of the pack's central grounds when he unexpectedly crossed paths with Damien, who was similarly walking alone, apparently lost in his own thoughts. "Working late tonight," Damien observed, pausing as their paths intersected, his tone more relaxed and conversational than Kane had previously witnessed during their brief, formal interactions. "Gareth pushed us hard today," Kane replied, matching Damien's more casual tone carefully. "Preparing us for increased border patrols, apparently." Damien nodded, his expression shifting slightly towards something more serious. "The borders have grown increasingly unstable lately," he admitted, somewhat unexpectedly candid given his position. "Rival packs testing our defenses, sensing vulnerabilities." Kane studied his father carefully, sensing an unusual opening for deeper conversation. "May I ask you something?" he ventured carefully. Damien raised an eyebrow slightly, though he nodded permission. "Go ahead." "You seem troubled," Kane said carefully, choosing his words with deliberate caution. "Beyond just the border issues, is something else weighing on you?" Damien studied him for a long moment, clearly surprised by the directness of this question, from someone he still considered a relative stranger. For a moment, Kane worried he had overstepped significantly, potentially raising unwanted suspicion, but instead, something shifted in Damien's expression. a subtle loosening of the careful guard he typically maintained. "You're perceptive," Damien said finally, his voice quieter now. "More perceptive than most people around here seem willing to acknowledge, myself included, most days." He paused for a long moment, apparently considering how much to reveal to this relative stranger, before continuing somewhat unexpectedly. "I made a significant mistake many years ago," he said slowly, his gaze drifting toward the distant horizon. "A mistake I've never fully resolved, one that I believe continues affecting this pack's stability even now, though I've spent years trying to convince myself otherwise." Kane's heart pounded steadily, recognizing immediately the significance of what his father was beginning to reveal, though he maintained careful outward composure. "What kind of mistake?" he asked carefully. Damien hesitated, clearly wrestling internally with how much to share. "I rejected someone," he said finally, his voice heavy with barely restrained emotion. "Someone who should have mattered more to me than pride, or politics, or the expectations others placed upon me. I've regretted that decision every single day since, though I've never found the courage to properly acknowledge that regret, not even to myself." Kane felt a complex surge of emotion at hearing this unexpected, genuine admission from his father, anger at the pain this rejection had caused his mother warring internally, with an unexpected flicker of something closer to sympathy, recognizing the genuine remorse evident in Damien's voice. "Do you know what happened to her?" Kane asked carefully, unable to fully resist the pull toward this significant conversation, despite the risks involved. Damien shook his head slowly. "No," he admitted. "She disappeared shortly after that night. I've never been able to locate her, despite occasional attempts over the years. Part of me wonders if she's even still—" He trailed off, unable to complete the difficult thought. "Do you regret it?" Kane pressed gently. "The rejection itself, I mean, not just the consequences." Damien was quiet for a long moment before answering, his expression carrying genuine, raw vulnerability that surprised Kane given his father's typically guarded demeanor. "Every day," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "I felt something the moment I met her, something I've never felt before or since, not even with the woman I eventually married. I let pride and fear convince me that feeling meant nothing, that it couldn't possibly be real, given her lower status within pack hierarchy. I was wrong. I've known I was wrong for years now, but by the time I fully understood that truth, it was already far too late to undo the damage." Kane absorbed this confession carefully, recognizing genuine remorse in his father's words, remorse that complicated the straightforward anger he had carried toward Damien throughout most of his life. He wanted, desperately, to reveal his true identity in this moment, to tell his father directly about Elena, about the son that rejection had unknowingly created. But years of careful training and Edwin's persistent warnings held him back, recognizing that such a significant revelation, delivered without proper preparation or protection, could prove dangerous given the current political instability within the pack. "I'm sorry," Kane said instead, his voice carefully measured despite the storm of emotion churning within him. "That sounds like a difficult burden to carry." Damien nodded slowly, seeming to appreciate the simple acknowledgement. "It is," he admitted. "But I suppose some mistakes simply have to be lived with, regardless of how much regret accompanies them." They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment afterward, the earlier tension between them noticeably softened by this unexpected exchange of genuine vulnerability. Eventually, Damien straightened, apparently recovering his usual composed demeanor. "Thank you for listening," he said, offering Kane a genuine, if weary, smile. "It's rare I find myself speaking so openly with anyone these days." "Any time," Kane replied sincerely, watching as his father continued on his way, disappearing gradually into the darkness beyond the training grounds. Kane remained standing alone for a long while afterward, processing the significant emotional weight of their unexpected conversation. He had come to this territory seeking understanding, seeking clarity about the painful history connecting his mother to this powerful pack. He hadn't anticipated discovering genuine, complicated remorse within the very father he had expected to find entirely unsympathetic. This complexity, he recognized, would make his eventual decision regarding his own identity and future within the pack considerably more difficult than he had originally anticipated. Unbeknownst to both father and son, Their private conversation had been observed from a discreet distance by one of Lydia's loyal informants, who quickly relayed detailed reports of this unusual exchange back to their mistress. Lydia listened carefully to these reports, her sharp mind immediately recognizing potential danger in Damien's unexpected openness with this mysterious young traveler who had so quickly earned unusual attention and respect within the pack. She began, that very night, quietly investigating Kane's background more aggressively, determined to uncover exactly who this newcomer truly was, and what potential threat he might pose to her carefully constructed position within the pack's power structure. The careful balance Kane had worked so hard to maintain throughout his weeks within Cross territory was about to become considerably more precarious, as forces beyond his control began moving steadily toward the inevitable revelation of his true identity. Lydia Marsh had not risen to her position of influence within the Cross pack through patience alone. She was thorough, methodical, and utterly relentless when she sensed a potential threat, and the mysterious young traveler who had so quickly captured Damien's unusual attention represented exactly the kind of variable she refused to leave unexamined. She began her investigation quietly, dispatching trusted informants to gather information about Kane's background, his travels, and most importantly, his true origins. For several days, these efforts yielded little beyond the same vague, carefully constructed cover story Kane had provided during his initial arrival within the territory. But Lydia was not easily discouraged, and she soon expanded her investigation beyond the immediate territory, reaching out to contacts within neighboring packs and territories, searching for any information about a young wolf matching Kane's distinctive appearance and remarkable combat skill. It was during this expanded search that Lydia's informants finally uncovered a crucial piece of information, a fragmented rumor originating from a small coastal territory far to the south, describing a remarkably skilled young wolf named Kane, raised by a mysterious single mother with no known pack affiliation. The details remained frustratingly incomplete, but combined with Lydia's growing suspicions, this fragment proved enough to significantly heighten her concern. She brought this information directly to Edwin Blake, correctly suspecting, given his position as a senior pack advisor with decades of institutional knowledge, that he might possess additional insight into this mysterious connection. Edwin, caught unprepared by the directness of her inquiry, struggled to maintain his careful composure as Lydia laid out the fragmented information she had gathered. "This traveler," Lydia said, her sharp eyes studying Edwin's expression carefully for any telling reaction, "arrived under suspiciously vague circumstances, quickly earned unusual favor from Damien himself, and now, I discover, may share a name with a young wolf raised by an unknown mother in a distant southern territory. Doesn't this concern you, Edwin, given your particular history with tracking down certain missing persons over the years?" Edwin felt his pulse quicken, recognizing that Lydia's suspicions had grown dangerously close to uncovering the truth he and Elena had worked so carefully to protect. "I'm not certain what you're implying," he said carefully, striving to maintain believable composure despite the sudden intensity of his concern. Lydia's expression sharpened further, clearly unconvinced by his careful deflection. "I think you know exactly what I'm implying," she said coldly. "And I think, if my suspicions prove correct, this situation represents a significant threat to the stability of this pack's leadership succession." Edwin remained silent for a long, tense moment, recognizing the delicate danger of this conversation. He needed, urgently, to warn Kane about the extent of Lydia's growing suspicions, but he also needed to avoid directly confirming anything that might further solidify her concerns before he had the opportunity to do so. "If you have specific concerns," Edwin said finally, choosing his words with extreme care, "perhaps it would be wise to bring them directly to Damien, rather than pursuing independent investigations that might prove misleading." Lydia studied him for a long, calculating moment before finally nodding, though her expression remained clearly suspicious. "Perhaps I will," she said, "but rest assured, Edwin, I intend to uncover the full truth about this mysterious traveler, one way or another." She left without further conversation, and Edwin immediately made his way toward Kane's rented room, his heart pounding with urgent concern. He found Kane preparing for his evening training session, and quickly relayed the full extent of Lydia's dangerous investigation. "She's grown suspicious," Edwin warned urgently. "Very suspicious. If she continues pursuing this line of investigation, she may uncover your true identity, far sooner than we anticipated, and given her clear desperation to protect her position, I fear how she might react to that discovery. Kane absorbed this warning with careful, controlled focus, recognizing the significant shift in his circumstances. "What do you suggest?" he asked directly. Edwin considered the question carefully before responding. "I believe," he said slowly, "the time has come to consider revealing your identity on your own terms, rather than risking Lydia forcing that revelation through more dangerous means. If Damien learns the truth directly from you, in a controlled setting, you maintain considerably more advantage than if Lydia exposes you unexpectedly, potentially framing the revelation in ways designed to paint you as a genuine threat rather than a legitimate heir." Kane considered this advice seriously, recognizing the wisdom in Edwin's assessment, despite the significant personal risk involved in such a direct revelation. "I need to speak with my mother first," he said finally. "This decision affects her deeply as well, and I won't move forward with something this significant without her knowledge and support." Edwin nodded, understanding the importance of this consideration. "I'll arrange secure communication with her as quickly as possible," he promised. "But Kane, please understand, we likely don't have much time before Lydia's investigation reaches its inevitable conclusion, regardless of how quickly we act." That evening, through careful, secure communication channels Edwin had established over the years, Kane finally spoke directly with his mother, for the first time since departing on his journey north, explaining the significant developments that had unfolded during his weeks within Cross territory. Elena listened carefully, her heart racing with a complicated mixture of fear and cautious pride, as Kane described his training, his unexpected conversation with Damien, and now, the mounting danger posed by Lydia's growing suspicions. "You need to be extremely careful," she said firmly, once Kane finished his explanation. "If Lydia feels genuinely threatened, she may act ruthlessly to protect her position, regardless of the legitimacy of your claim." "I understand the risk," Kane acknowledged. "But Edwin believes revealing my identity directly to Damien, on my own terms, offers our best chance of managing this situation safely, rather than allowing Lydia to control how and when that truth eventually emerges." Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing the weight of this decision, recognizing that the moment she had both anticipated and dreaded for years had finally arrived. "If you believe that's the wisest path forward," she said finally, her voice steady, despite the obvious emotion underlying her words, "then I trust your judgment, Kane. You've grown into a remarkably capable young man, and I believe in your ability to navigate this situation successfully." "Thank you, Mama," Kane said softly, genuine gratitude evident in his voice. "I promise, whatever happens next, I'll handle this as carefully and safely as possible." "I know you will," Elena replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you, Kane. Please, stay safe." "I love you too," Kane said sincerely, before ending the careful, secure communication. With his mother's support secured, Kane turned his attention toward planning the specific approach he would take in revealing his true identity to Damien, working closely with Edwin to develop a strategy that would minimize risk while maximizing the legitimacy of his claim before the wider pack community. They decided, after careful deliberation, that Kane would request a private audience with Damien the following evening, presenting clear, verifiable evidence of his heritage before making any broader public announcement, allowing Damien the opportunity to process this significant revelation privately before any wider pack involvement became necessary. As the following day progressed, Kane found himself increasingly aware of subtle signs suggesting Lydia's investigation continued intensifying around him. Several pack members he had grown friendly with during his weeks of training seemed notably more reserved in their interactions, clearly having received quiet warnings to maintain distance from the increasingly suspicious newcomer. Kane recognized these signs as clear indication that Lydia's suspicions had grown significantly, reinforcing Edwin's urgent recommendation to proceed with his planned revelation as quickly as possible. That evening, as the sun began setting over the Cross territory, Kane made his way carefully toward the central hall, prepared finally to reveal the truth that would fundamentally reshape not only his own future, but the future of the entire struggling pack he had spent weeks carefully observing, and, despite his initial reservations, growing increasingly invested in protecting. He carried with him a small, carefully preserved item Elena had given him before his departure. A simple silver pendant that had belonged to Damien, accidentally left behind during his brief, painful visit to Elena's territory years earlier, before her hasty departure, following the humiliating rejection. Elena had kept the pendant hidden away for years, uncertain exactly why she had never discarded it entirely, though she now recognized its significant value as concrete proof of Kane's true heritage, evidence that would prove considerably more difficult for Damien, or anyone else, to dismiss or deny. With the pendant secured carefully in his pocket, and his heart pounding steadily, with a complex mixture of determination and understandable apprehension, Kane approached the entrance of the central hall, prepared finally to step fully into the truth of his powerful, complicated heritage. Kane entered the central hall to find Damien alone, reviewing pact documents by candlelight, the same weary expression Kane had grown accustomed to seeing, etched clearly across his father's features. Damien looked up as Kane approached, offering a brief, welcoming nod, though something in Kane's uncharacteristically serious demeanor immediately caught his attention. "You look troubled," Damien observed, setting aside his documents. "Is something wrong?" Kane took a steadying breath, recognizing the significance of the moment finally arriving. "I need to tell you something important," he said carefully. "Something that concerns both of us directly." Damien's expression shifted toward careful attention, sensing the gravity underlying Kane's words. "I'm listening." Kane reached into his pocket, carefully withdrawing the silver pendant Elena had preserved for so many years, extending it toward his father. "Do you recognize this?" Damien's eyes widened immediately upon seeing the pendant, his hand trembling slightly as he reached out to take it, examining it closely with an expression of dawning, disbelieving recognition. This belonged to me," he said slowly, his voice tight with sudden, powerful emotion. "I lost this years ago, during a visit to—" He trailed off, his gaze snapping up sharply toward Kane, understanding beginning to dawn rapidly across his features. "Where did you get this?" "My mother kept it," Kane said quietly, watching carefully as the full weight of realization settled visibly across his father's face. "She's kept it for 18 years, since the night you rejected her in front of your entire pack." Damien's face drained of color, the pendant slipping slightly in his suddenly unsteady grip. "Elena," he whispered, the name carrying decades of buried guilt and longing. You're her son?" "I'm your son too," Kane said firmly, meeting his father's shocked gaze directly. "Kane Hart, though I suppose, by rights, I should carry the cross name as well." Damien stared at him for a long, stunned moment, visibly struggling to process the enormity of this revelation. 18 years, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're 18 years old?" Kane nodded slowly. "My mother discovered she was pregnant shortly after you rejected her. She decided, given everything that happened that night, that raising me far from this pack, without your knowledge, represented the safest path forward." Damien sank slowly into his chair, the pendant still clutched tightly in his trembling hand, visibly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was learning. "All these years," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I wondered what became of her. I searched, occasionally, though never as thoroughly as I should have. I never imagined, I never once considered she might have been carrying my child when she disappeared." "She protected me," Kane said, his own voice carrying underlying tension despite his careful composure. "She built a good life for us, far from the pain you caused her. But I needed to understand where I came from, needed to see this world for myself, which is why I came here." Damien looked up at him, raw vulnerability evident in his expression. "I made a terrible mistake that night," he said, his voice heavy with genuine, powerful remorse. "I let pride and political pressure convince me to reject the one true bond I've ever experienced. I've regretted that decision every single day since, though I never imagined the full extent of what that rejection ultimately cost me." Before Kane could respond further, the sound of the hall's main doors bursting open interrupted their emotional exchange. Lydia stood in the doorway, her expression carrying a dangerous mixture of triumph and barely controlled fury, several loyal warriors positioned behind her. "So the truth finally comes out," she said coldly, striding into the hall with sharp, purposeful steps. "I suspected as much." The mysterious traveler, with the suspicious skill and the convenient connection to Damien's forgotten past. Damien rose quickly from his chair, positioning himself protectively near Kane, despite his own obvious shock. "Lydia, this doesn't concern you," he said firmly. "Doesn't concern me?" Lydia's voice rose sharply, genuine desperation bleeding through her carefully maintained composure. "This boy represents a direct threat to everything I've spent years building within this pack. You expect me to simply step aside and allow some unknown bastard child to claim rights to leadership succession?" "He's not unknown," Damien said firmly, his voice carrying renewed authority despite the shocking circumstances. "He's my son, Lydia, my true heir, born from my true mate bond." "A bond you rejected," Lydia spat back, her expression twisting with barely controlled anger. "You made your choice years ago, Damien. You chose me. Chose this pack's political stability over some inconvenient low-status mate. You can't simply reverse that decision now, because a convenient, mysterious young traveler shows up claiming false heritage." "The pendant proves his claim," Damien said firmly, holding up the silver pendant as clear evidence. "This isn't a false claim, Lydia. This is the truth, finally coming to light, after years of my own cowardice and denial." Lydia's expression darkened further, recognizing the strength of Damien's conviction despite her desperate attempts to discredit the situation. "Then I suppose," she said coldly, her hand moving subtly toward a concealed weapon at her side, "we'll need to resolve this matter more permanently." Kane, sensing the sudden shift in danger, moved quickly, intercepting Lydia's motion before she could fully draw her weapon, his years of careful training allowing him to disarm her with practiced, controlled efficiency. The warriors accompanying her moved forward threateningly, but Damien's sharp, commanding voice immediately halted their advance. "Enough!" he roared, his authority as Alpha reasserting itself powerfully, for the first time in years. "No one moves against my son." "Lydia, you've overstepped considerably tonight, revealing intentions I fear have been simmering far longer than I ever realized." Lydia, breathing heavily, glared furiously at both Damien and Kane, recognizing that her carefully constructed position had crumbled dramatically within these tense, dramatic moments. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "This pack won't accept an unknown, unproven heir simply because you claim some romantic redemption story after years of political failure." "Then let the pack decide for themselves," Damien said firmly, his voice carrying renewed, powerful conviction. "Tomorrow, I'll call a full pack gathering. Kane will have the opportunity to prove his claim and his strength before everyone, following our traditional rites of succession." Lydia's expression flickered with brief uncertainty, before hardening once more into cold determination. "Fine," she said sharply. "But don't expect this pack to simply accept him without proper challenge. Damien, tradition demands proof of strength, not merely convenient bloodline claims." "He'll provide that proof," Damien said confidently, glancing toward Kane, with a mixture of paternal pride and lingering guilt. "I have no doubt of that." Lydia stormed from the hall shortly afterward, her warriors following closely behind, leaving Damien and Kane alone once more, amid the tense aftermath of this dramatic confrontation. "I'm sorry," Damien said quietly, turning back toward his son, once the tension had somewhat settled. "For everything. For the pain I caused your mother, for the years you both spent without the protection and support you deserved as my true family." "We survived," Kane said simply, though his voice carried underlying complexity, years of buried resentment mixing uneasily with newfound understanding of his father's genuine remorse. "But surviving isn't the same as forgiving, not entirely. Not yet." Damien nodded slowly, accepting this honest acknowledgement. "I understand," he said. "I don't expect immediate forgiveness, Kane. I only hope, moving forward, I might have the opportunity to prove myself worthy of rebuilding whatever relationship remains possible between us." Kane considered this for a long moment, before finally nodding. "Tomorrow's gathering will determine a lot," he said carefully. "Let's focus on that first." That night proved difficult for both father and son, each grappling privately with the overwhelming emotional weight of their unexpected reunion, while simultaneously preparing for the significant, potentially dangerous challenge awaiting them the following day. Edwin, informed quickly of the dramatic confrontation, worked urgently through the night, rallying loyal pack allies who remained faithful to legitimate leadership succession, preparing crucial support for Kane's upcoming challenge. Lydia, meanwhile, retreated to her private quarters, her mind racing furiously, as she considered increasingly desperate options for maintaining her threatened position. She understood clearly that traditional pack succession rights would likely favor Kane, given the undeniable strength he had already demonstrated during his weeks of training. If she hoped to prevent his successful claim, she would need to employ considerably more drastic measures before the following day's gathering. She began quietly reaching out to her own loyal allies within the pack, along with contacts from her family's allied territory, setting into motion a dangerous, secretive plan designed to eliminate the threat Kane represented before he ever had the opportunity to formally claim his rightful place as heir to the cross-pack throne. As dawn approached, neither Kane nor Damien remained fully aware of the depths of Lydia's growing desperation, nor the significant danger quietly gathering around the pivotal gathering scheduled to take place later that day, a gathering that would ultimately determine not only Kane's future, but the entire fate of the struggling cross-pack itself. By midday, word of the previous night's dramatic revelation had spread rapidly throughout the cross territory, and by the time the sun reached its peak, nearly the entire pack had gathered within the wide central grounds outside the main hall, eager and anxious to witness the unfolding events that would determine their future leadership. Kane stood near the edge of the gathering crowd, Edwin close beside him, offering quiet words of encouragement and last-minute strategic advice. Elena, having traveled through the night upon receiving urgent word from Edwin about the dramatic developments unfolding, arrived just as the gathering began forming, her presence immediately drawing startled recognition from several older pack members who remembered her clearly from years earlier. "Mama," Kane said softly, relief and gratitude evident in his voice as she approached him amid the gathering crowd. "You didn't need to come." "Of course I did," Elena said firmly, embracing her son warmly, despite the tension surrounding them. "You shouldn't have to face this alone, Kane. Not something this significant." Nearby, Damien watched this reunion with visible, complicated emotion, recognizing Elena immediately, despite the years that had passed since their painful parting. He approached slowly, his expression carrying genuine remorse and uncertainty about how she might receive him after everything that had happened between them. "Elena," he said quietly, stopping a respectful distance away, "I owe you an apology far greater than words can properly convey." Elena studied him carefully for a long moment, old pain and newfound complexity mixing uneasily within her expression. "We'll discuss that properly another time," she said finally, her voice steady despite the obvious emotional weight of the moment. "Right now, our son needs to focus on what's ahead." Damien nodded, accepting this measured response with visible understanding. "Of course," he said. "Thank you for raising him so remarkably well, despite everything." Before further conversation could continue, the sound of ceremonial horns signaled the formal beginning of the pack gathering, drawing everyone's attention toward the central platform, where Damien would need to preside over the traditional proceedings, determining Kane's legitimate claim to succession. Damien moved toward the platform, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd as he formally explained the situation, acknowledging publicly his past rejection of Elena, his previously unknown son, and the traditional rites of proof required to formally recognize Kane's legitimate claim to eventual pack leadership. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as this dramatic history unfolded publicly for the first time, many older pack members exchanging knowing glances, clearly recalling the painful events from years earlier, with newfound understanding of their broader significance. Lydia stood near the platform as well, her expression carefully composed, despite the obvious tension simmering beneath her calm exterior. She had spent the previous night working urgently to secure additional support, though her efforts had proven more limited than she had hoped. Many pack members increasingly skeptical of her continued influence, given the dramatic revelations now unfolding before them. "According to our pack's traditional laws," Damien announced formally, "any claimed heir must demonstrate proof of both bloodline and worthy strength through formal challenge, witnessed by the full pack community. Kane Hart has presented physical proof of his heritage. Now he must demonstrate the strength expected of a legitimate heir to cross-pack leadership." A murmur of anticipation rippled through the gathered crowd as Gareth Holt, the pack's respected head warrior, stepped forward to oversee the formal challenge proceedings. "Traditional succession challenges require the claimed heir to face our pack's strongest current warrior in controlled formal combat," Gareth announced. Given recent developments, I volunteer to serve as that challenger myself, to ensure a fair and legitimate assessment of the young man's claimed strength. Kane nodded respectfully, understanding the necessity of this formal demonstration, despite the obvious risk involved. He had trained under Gareth for weeks now, understood his combat style intimately, though he also recognized that Gareth remained genuinely one of the most skilled warriors within the entire pack. The formal challenge began shortly afterward, the two combatants meeting in the center of a carefully marked circle, while the assembled crowd watched with rapt, anxious attention. Elena watched nervously from the sidelines, her hands clasped tightly together as she observed her son preparing to prove himself before an entire pack community that had once so cruelly rejected her. The match proved intense and closely contested. Gareth's decades of experience matched carefully against Kane's exceptional natural talent and years of disciplined training. Both combatants displayed remarkable skill and control, neither willing to concede advantage easily, the crowd growing increasingly invested as the challenge continued. Eventually, through a combination of superior speed and carefully executed technique, Kane managed to gain decisive advantage, ultimately securing victory through controlled, disciplined skill, rather than excessive aggression, a demonstration that impressed the watching crowd considerably, given the restraint and precision he displayed throughout the challenging match. As the formal challenge concluded, Gareth himself, breathing heavily, but clearly respectful of his opponent's demonstrated skill, extended his hand toward Kane, in a gesture of genuine acknowledgement. "Well fought," he said sincerely, loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear clearly. "You've proven your strength beyond any reasonable doubt." A wave of approving murmurs spread quickly through the assembled pack, many faces shifting visibly from cautious skepticism toward genuine, respectful acceptance of Kane's demonstrated capabilities. Lydia, watching this outcome unfold with mounting desperation, recognized that her carefully constructed opposition had crumbled decisively before the full pack community. Still, she made one final, desperate attempt to discredit Kane's legitimate claim. "Strength alone doesn't guarantee wise leadership," she called out sharply, stepping forward before the assembled crowd. "This boy knows nothing of our pack's history, our alliances, our complex political relationships. Are we truly prepared to hand leadership succession to someone raised entirely outside our community?" Edwin, anticipating exactly this kind of challenge, stepped forward calmly, prepared with a carefully organized response. "Perhaps," he said, addressing the crowd directly, "it would be valuable for the pack to understand exactly how our recent troubles began, and who specifically has been responsible for the concerning political and resource shifts we've experienced over recent years." He proceeded to lay out, calmly and methodically, the extensive evidence he had carefully gathered over years of quiet investigation, detailing Lydia's consistent manipulation of pack resources and alliances toward her own family's benefit, the systematic sidelining of loyal warriors in favor of her personal allies, and the significant political damage her ambitious maneuvering had caused throughout her years of influence within the pack. The crowd's reaction shifted rapidly from surprise toward growing anger, as Edwin's carefully documented evidence unfolded clearly before them. Years of quiet suspicion and frustration among pack members finally finding concrete confirmation. Lydia's expression grew increasingly desperate as she recognized her carefully constructed position, collapsing entirely before the assembled community she had spent years attempting to manipulate. "This is absurd," she protested weakly, though her voice carried little genuine conviction, given the overwhelming evidence Edwin had presented. "These are baseless accusations. The pack's own resource records confirm every detail," Edwin replied calmly, producing carefully organized documentation for anyone wishing to verify his claims directly. "I've maintained these records carefully over the years, anticipating exactly this kind of necessary reckoning." Damien, having listened carefully throughout this dramatic unfolding of long-buried truths, finally stepped forward, his expression carrying renewed, powerful authority. "Lydia Marsh," he announced formally, his voice carrying clearly across the now completely silent gathering. "Given the extensive evidence presented today, and the significant damage your actions have caused this pack over recent years, I hereby revoke your position within cross-pack leadership, effective immediately." Lydia's expression crumbled entirely, recognizing the complete collapse of everything she had spent years carefully constructing. She said nothing further, simply turning and departing quickly from the gathering, accompanied by several of her remaining loyal allies, disappearing from the Cross territory entirely before the sun set that same day. With this dramatic resolution complete, Damien turned back toward Cain, his expression carrying genuine pride and profound relief. "Cain Hart," he announced formally before the assembled pack, having demonstrated both legitimate bloodline claim and proven strength through formal challenge. "I hereby recognize you as the rightful heir to cross-pack leadership." The crowd erupted into genuine, enthusiastic approval, many pack members clearly relieved to see stability and legitimate leadership finally restored after years of increasing uncertainty and struggle. Cain accepted this formal recognition with humble, careful dignity, understanding fully the significant responsibility now settling upon his shoulders. In the weeks that followed, Cain worked closely alongside Damien, gradually learning the full complexities of pack leadership while beginning the careful process of repairing the significant damage caused by years of Lydia's manipulative influence. Trusted warriors who had been unfairly sidelined found themselves welcomed back into positions of respect and responsibility. Damaged alliances slowly began rebuilding through careful, honest diplomatic efforts. Resources previously diverted toward Lydia's family territory were redirected back toward strengthening the Cross-Pack's own struggling communities. Elena, though she chose ultimately not to permanently relocate back within Cross territory, maintained regular, meaningful contact with both Cain and, gradually, with Damien himself, the painful history between them slowly transforming into something more complicated, but considerably more peaceful than the bitter estrangement of previous years. Damien, though he understood fully that he could never completely undo the pain his earlier rejection had caused, dedicated himself consistently toward rebuilding whatever relationship remained possible with both Elena and their remarkable son. Cain, meanwhile, continued growing steadily into his new role as recognized heir, balancing careful respect for pack traditions with his own progressive vision for the territory's future, gradually earning genuine trust and admiration from pack members who had initially approached his unexpected arrival with understandable skepticism. Nearly a year after that dramatic pack gathering, as Cain formally assumed full alpha responsibilities following Damien's decision to step back into a supportive advisory role, the Cross-Pack stood stronger and more unified than it had been in over a decade. The painful legacy of rejection and manipulation that had once threatened the pack's very survival had gradually transformed into a powerful story of resilience, redemption, and rightful succession. Standing before his pack during his formal alpha recognition ceremony, Cain looked out at the assembled community, at his mother standing proudly nearby, at his father watching with genuine, complicated pride, and he felt, for the first time since arriving in this complex, challenging territory, a profound sense of belonging and purpose. "This pack," he said, his voice carrying clearly and confidently across the gathered crowd, "was nearly lost through pride, fear, and manipulation. But we've proven, together, that strength built on honesty and genuine respect will always prove more powerful than strength built on manipulation and fear. I intend to lead this pack forward guided by those very principles, honoring both the mistakes of our past and the genuine opportunity for a stronger, more united future." The crowd's enthusiastic response confirmed clearly that Cain had earned not merely formal recognition, but genuine, heartfelt respect and loyalty from the community he now proudly served as their rightful alpha. And somewhere within that celebrating crowd, Elena Hart watched her son standing tall and confident before the very pack that had once so cruelly rejected her, and she felt, finally, after so many years of quiet struggle and determined strength, a profound and complete sense of peace. The rejection that had once threatened to define her entire life had instead become merely the difficult beginning of an extraordinary story, one that ultimately led towards strength, redemption, and a rightful, well-earned claim to the throne that had always truly belonged to her remarkable son.